What I'm going to talk about now is an example of how we have tackled parking issues in Bangalore. Uh, as I think Kashmira told in the morning, it's an elephant in the room. Uh, and it's an elephant that's right on our face. While yesterday we spoke about infrastructure, how infrastructure has to be created for better streets, better walkability and cyclability. Uh, this is an elephant which we can't ignore. So we need to do something about this, and that's where the policy and the area parking plans come into place. Uh, First of all, Bangalore had a parking policy since 2012. We also did a small area parking plan for the core business district of Bangalore. It's about 20 square kilometers. About 85 roads were identified and detailed plans were prepared for them. And BBMP is implementing those plans. You'll have a subsequent presentation with more details on that. But what happened in 2020 is a lot of changes in Bangalore. First thing is we got metro. Right now, about more than 45 kilometers of metro is operational, and the 72 is going to be operational in the next couple of years. Apart from that, the master plan was getting revised. Concept of TOD was brought into this master plan, so we had to think differently, the way city develops and the way mobility happens in the city. And also, there were things like increasing vehicular growth. I think in the decade, probably we have doubled the number of vehicles in the city. So there's something very differently we had to do about parking, and parking is the instrument to achieve that. So when we got this new policy, we call Policy 2.0, we had very basic 4 objectives. One is, how do we move from chaotic parking to a systemic parking? The second was, to ensure that nowhere in Bangalore parking is going to be free. It has to be charged. And third one is, how do we move away from a government-driven parking supply to a private, supplied parking? And third is, how do we move from passive enforcement to a more active management? Because as we manage the parking better, there is less need for enforcement. Because whenever we have to do something, the pushback sometimes comes from the police. They say, we don't have that much force to enforce. So we thought there should be something different we need to do where we manage better so that the enforcement is less. I'm going to briefly talk about the policy. The policy is on our website, so I'm not going to cover everything, but the key aspects was about streamlining. So what we told is that on every parking lot, at least 10 bicycle parking has to be provided. We need to prioritize other short-term users on street, like loading, unloading, pickup, drop-off, and maybe short-term parking to some extent. And on major routes, we call high-density corridors, which not necessarily means, moving or roads with very high traffic, but also very high frequency of buses, a lot of pedestrians. So such roads parking shall be banned on such roads. So that's the kind of statement that was made in the policy. There was also, we talked about residential parking. Majority of the roads are residential in nature. And nowadays, it's very difficult for anybody to even walk on residential streets and, forget about kids playing on those streets. So we wanted to reclaim those spaces on residential streets. So one of the strategy that has been proposed is to at least control the amount of parking that happens through permit system. And what this permit basically says is that parking is not a right. So you will have a permit to park on a street or an area in which a permit is given, but not necessarily you're going to get parking there. So if a space is available, you can go and park. So that's what the policy talks about. And when we are issuing the permits, they look into the building regulations and ensure that it's not in violation to what was approved, the building plans that were approved. The instrument that we use to plan these aspects in the parking is called as the area parking plan. Right now, we have embarked on doing the on-street parking, the commercial on-street parking, but we'll subsequently also be doing the residential parking. The other aspect that we have covered, as I told, TOD is one very important thing. So we have told in the TOD zone, that's about roughly 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 meters from a transit node. The parking norms will be reduced significantly, and whatever the parking people have to provide more than the minimum parking will actually be counted in the calculation of FAR. So they better know that instead of giving space for people, they're actually occupying space for the vehicles. And also what we have told is in the multi-sectoral parks, we have a lot of IT parks here and industrial estates. So in those, it is mandated for them to provide for a bus stop. Right now, a lot of these IT parks, they don't allow buses to go in, so or even IPT to get in. So a lot of these bus or the bus stops or the IPT stops happen on the road, and that's not very convenient for people to walk inside. And as Pareen told, technology is very critical. So what we have proposed is to have a citywide parking portal where not just government-provided parking is captured and displayed, but also the private parking. As I told, the shared parking is very important. There are people who may not use their parking spaces throughout the day, so they can actually put it up on the website, so people know there is some parking available, and they can, in fact, charge whatever is as per the policy, or be more than that, but not less than the policy. Coming to the pricing strategy, it went through a lot of iterations, but what finally got approved by the government is the base parking fee, the minimum parking fee that we can charge in the city should be more than the to and fro average trip in Bangalore, so which is about 22 kilometers to and fro. So whatever is the cost of that by public transport, the parking fee per hour, the base parking fee will be higher than that. And the on-street parking will be much higher than the off-street parking. The policy says it can vary anywhere between 1.5 to 3 times, so we can fix that based on the land use, so that kind of a flexibility has been given. Bicycles park for free, and the charges for all vehicles will be based on their passenger equivalent. We've also, when we are doing the policy, there are questions on how do you tackle the, what you call the e-commerce vehicles, because they park many times in a day. So we came up with a thing called bulk mechanism, where they basically pay on the proportion of the hour. So if it's 60 rupees per hour, and if they park for, say, 5 minutes, so they pay 10 rupees. But that would be through a bulk mechanism where it gets redeemed. And as Pareen told, all this parking revenue, we wanted to, there's a separate account that will be created in BBMP called parking funds, and that will be utilized mostly for the purpose of improving non-motorized transport infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, and public realm. Because at the end of the day, our whole goal is to move people away from parking to other sustainable modes. So that's about the policy, which got approved actually in 2021 of February. So now what we are doing is to create plans. The government has directed our department, DULT, to prepare plans for the entire Bangalore. It basically has BBMP has about 8 zones, 712 square kilometers. And we have started preparing for it at a zonal level. The basic approach is 6 steps. We have defined certain planning principles. We have collected extensively data on, the road, what kind of ROW is available in the road, what is the width of the footpath, spaces available. Then we have collected on what is the current parking demand. And thirdly, what we have done is we have set some design standards. What happens is when you start providing parking, even at certain places, it looks very ugly on street. So we wanted to see how it can be slightly made better. So we have come up with certain standards, which we think is at least, makes the street look slightly better. Then also we have, as per the policies, there are certain restrictions. We can't, we have, sorry, I'm sorry, these are the provisions. So what we have told is basically cycles has to be provided every 250 meter to 300 meter, wherever there is development, so that nobody has to walk more than 100 to 150 meters to get a cycle stand, cycle parking. We need to have pickup drop-offs, especially it's prioritized over providing for parking. We have tried to accommodate as much as possible at every parking lot a PWD, a person with disability parking. And also, loading and unloading has been given wherever there is a need, especially near godowns and large market areas. Auto stands also, we have tried to move the auto stands away from the main carriageway into the side roads so that, because they park for longer duration, so it's not that much of an issue for the traffic movement. There are certain restrictions, like, as near the junctions, we don't provide parking. 250 meters around MLCPs, existing MLCPs and transit nodes, we don't provide parking. On high density corridors, we don't provide parking, and about 20 meters on either side of the bus stop, we don't provide parking. This is the way we did the data collection. So we used an app called ArcGIS Collector, and we created a form, and we started collecting. We covered about 1,100 odd kilometers of roads, which gives us, details about what all is happening on the street. And the good thing about this is it happens in real time. So as in when people are collecting, our backend team is actually able to see what is collected. They can correct issues. They can give directions to the field team to change those corrections, in real time. And all these gets mapped automatically, geocoded. So we know exactly what data is where on the map. So the next thing that we did was, as I told, setting standards. So the decision that we have taken is a parking bay will not have more than 4 car parking units, whether it's cars or two-wheelers or any other modes. So that's the maximum size that can be provided. And even if there is more demand, there's going to be a break in parking. So we're going to have some landscape sections between or some other utilities. But there is some porosity. It creates a porosity between the carriageway and the footpaths. So people don't feel that insecure that they're walking, along the wall of a parked vehicles. Then what we did is we prepared something called as parking allocation plans. So this is basically a planning tool where we look at what is the land use in that area. We look at where are the existing parking happening, along with where the commercial activities are happening. So we know if the existing parking is spilling over outside of the commercial areas or not. And we also look at roads where bus movement is happening, where the high traffic movements are happening. So all this gets mapped, and based on this information, we actually start doing the allocation. So it's a rationalization process of where to provide, where not to provide. This is just an example of one ward. The circle portion is the transit node. So 250 meters around that, we don't provide parking. So the first layer is the bicycle parking, bicycle and shared micro-mobility, SMMS. So that has been provisioned to the extent possible, with a spacing of 250 to 300 meters. The next is the auto rickshaw parking. We have loading, unloading zones. We have two-wheelers and four-wheelers. And this is the combined parking allocation plan with all modes considered. And what we have done, the numbers, I just want to present for this. So in the existing, there were about parking availability for about 17 spaces for 17 cycles. We've increased that to 180. The SMMS, there were about 8 spaces. We have increased it to 135. Four-wheelers, we have decreased from 435 to 93. And two-wheelers has been decreased from 1647 to 1027. That's about 40% decrease. And loading, unloading didn't exist, so it's been provided at about 20 locations. And auto rickshaw has been decreased by 25%. So what we have done is a demand management. So then we don't think that currently when the parking is free, the number of spaces that is actually being utilized is required when parking is going to be charged. Lesser number of space can actually provide for more users. So what is more important is the turnaround. How many times a parking space gets used rather than how many number of parking spaces we provide. Stakeholder engagement was very key in this process. So we did a very, very elaborate stakeholder engagement. There was something called as, in the policy itself, we had constituted a task force at a zonal level. So every zone has a task force with the joint commissioner heading that, with traffic police and the transport department being a part of it. And all these plans were vetted in those task forces. And once we do a task force discussion, we also did a ward level consultation. So we went to every ward engineer, the jurisdictional traffic police. We did site visits with them. We marked what was accepted, what is not accepted. We again rationalized with them if we think something they were thinking was not right. And then finally, we again went back to the task force and told this is what the field level people are telling us and this is what we think should be, should not be. And finally, we took an approval at the task force with all the departments, relevant departments in place. And these plans were, basically approval was obtained for these plans. And once we got approval for these plans, the last step was preparation of the detailed designs for the DPR. So we have got surveys done for the roads to know the actual measurements. And we have allocated, as you can see, there are car parking, there is two-wheeler, there is SMSS, cycle parking. So all of them have tried to be accommodated. And we have completed about 2 zones, and we have submitted to BBMP for them to take it up for implementation. And very shortly, we'll be completing the remaining 6 zones for Bangalore. So it's a very citywide approach that we have taken. And also the policy states that, parking management should not happen at a street level. Normally, in most of our cities, what we do, individual roads are given for parking management. But what happens is we don't get good players when we do that. So it normally leads to, pilferage of funds, revenues and all these things. So what we have proposed here is that the entire zone should be managed by one agency. So get a good parking management agency, let them manage the entire system so they know how to balance it out using technology, and that should be the way forward, for a good parking management in any city. And to support that, we also have developed a signage manual, basically to help. This is not just for Bangalore, but for entire Karnataka. So we've created templates on how to communicate the parking regulations in cities. So there are various information signage. There are certain regulatory signage which we have also borrowed from the IRC, which we thought doesn't require. We also have a template for how to the parking permit should be given. This is basically the permit stickers. So these templates have been now shared with the government for approval, and we hope all cities will follow so that there's a uniform signage throughout the state. That's what we wanted to achieve out of this. That's the brief about our parking. We have a poster put in the backside if you want more details, and we'll also be happy to discuss on this further. Thank you so much.